as ever, I learn an awful lot listening to my journals colleagues talking about open access, because open access has developed very much faster in the journals world than the books world. So, so next slide, please. And it's a pleasure to be joining everybody today. I hope you have all getting back to a normal life after the pandemic, and that your friends and family have all stayed well. And look forward, before too long, I hope, be able to meet in person rather than in the webinars. But anyway, I'm going to talk about the book side of open access, and a lot of what I'm going to be saying is going to be echoing messages, key messages that that Daniel has explained. And so we're just going to take a quick look at the state of the market, explain how gold open access works for book authors. I'm not going to be talking about green open access today. Again, just rehearse some of the reasons why we think it's a good deal for authors to publish open access, to explain a little bit of the economics of it, how much it costs, the licenses used, and tell you a little bit about the our publishing program, book publishing program at Cambridge, and illustrate how already we have authors from Asia and Southeast Asia who are already publishing with us with open access. And when I'm talking about books, I will also be including our new format, Cambridge Elements, which are short form books, which are longer than journal articles, but shorter than typical monographs, which we've been developing and we're very excited about over the last 3 years. So next slide, please. As I said, open access started off very much in journal publishing, as Daniel was saying, initially more in the STEM subjects, but now increasingly also in humanities and social sciences. And to begin with, it was very much a journal conversation, and the book world was not really very much part of that. But we have been now engaging with it. People see that the advantages which Daniel has explained in the journals world also apply to books world, that the funders, the people who are funding the research that's published in books are as keen for those books to be made open access as they are for journals. So after a slow start in the books world, we are seeing more and more books being published open access. And the stats we have that globally, looking at all the different publishers, we now have about 50,000 open access books published across 400 different publishers. The reasons for the slow start that we have in books compared to journals is, I think, is actually it's very much more complex for books for two reasons. The first is that whilst it's quite easy to define what a research journal article is, it's much less easy to define what a research monograph is. And so our research monographs range in scope from very, very specialized, very kind of quite narrow topics, which really are going to be of interest to a relatively small group of researchers focused on that very particular subject, to other research monographs which actually have enormous significance, taking on big subjects and which have potential to have sort of major global impact, and which, had they been published in a normal way, would probably have sold thousands of copies. So trying to get a model that that can work equally well for those very narrow research monographs and the bigger monographs is tricky. And I think, as Daniel was saying, we're still experimenting and trying to work out ways we can do it. But that's one of the reasons why I think, particularly in the humanities and social sciences, that open access has been slower in books than in journals. And then there is the basic question of money, and Daniel's been talking about that in his slides, and that obviously applies in the books world too, with the added problem that for us, the fees involved for publishing a book are significantly larger, significantly bigger than in journals, so that we have the same problems that researchers typically don't have access to those funds, but then if they do want to publish gold open access, it's going to cost a lot more. So how does it work for book authors? And here this slide is similar similar to the messages in Daniel's myth busting slides earlier, to say that for us, our publishing decisions as a university press with our reputation based on quality and the scholarly contribution of our work is that when we decide to publish a book, we don't think at all about the publishing model. We think only about the quality of the book. Does it meet our standards? Is it making a significant scholarly contribution? And so we are very, very confident that on the Cambridge list, there is absolutely no difference in academic quality between our open access and our non-open access books. So this is gold open access is not the same as pay to publish, and that's I say that's sort of the same myth busting that Daniel was talking about. So we only make decision. We don't have to make a decision very early on in the process to publish gold open access. We can make that decision really quite late, and it always happens after the peer review process. When the book is published, the PDF is made free to download from a publishing platform in exactly the same way as in the journals world. But in addition, we also continue to publish print versions as we would normally do. And those, we publish the print version in paperback or hardback, and we make those available to purchase in absolutely the usual way. So a second myth, which applies particularly to more to books than to journals, is that in the books world, if you publish an open access book, it doesn't mean it's digital only. We publish both in digital and print formats. So next slide, please. So as I said, the fees involved for publishing open access are somewhat higher in the books world than journals. So instead of article processing charge, we call it a book processing charge, BPC, and our publicly advertised rates on our website is that to publish a book up to 120,000 words in length would cost £9,500 plus some taxes, and to publish one of our shorter format elements, the fee there is £5,500. And so we recognise that's quite a significant amount of money, but we are finding increasingly that research funding agencies, institutions are happy to pay that because of the benefits that it brings. But next slide, please. So again, the advantages of publishing gold open access, absolutely really the same as the advantages that Daniel was talking about in the journals world. Global readership that particularly going to get readers in parts of the world who are not based at well-funded universities. They have the same access to that knowledge as somebody based at a wealthy university in North America. So it's very democratic, it's very inclusive. We think based on the ease of the access and the impact that it's more likely to, your work is more likely to be read by policymakers and journalists. You will ensure with that wider dissemination of your work that your own reputation as your standing as a scholar will be increased. You're more likely to have your work cited and reported on. And although it may seem quite an expensive fee, the BPC, it actually is overall, it's good use of money because it does do all the things that scholars and the research agencies want to do. Is they don't want to do research, fund research, which is only going to be read by a very small number of people. So the that investment in the BPC does result in much wider usage and readership. So next slide, please. So the licenses that we publish under are essentially the same as in the journals world. Have this Creative Commons license, which Daniel was describing earlier, and typically we use a version of that license called CC BY NC, where readers can distribute the book and adapt it for their teaching or work, but they're not able to sell it commercially. And as in those journals Creative Commons licenses, the copyright actually remains with the author, and that will all be recognized and printed within the prelims pages of the book. So next slide, please. So at Cambridge, we published our very first open access book in 2014. And that's been slowly kind of building up, and now we publish just over 200 open access books and elements using the standard gold open access method. So we recognize that this is a much smaller output than we see in journals. I think it's, we think that we're at sort of the leading edge of university presses, North American and British university presses in our engagement with open access. We're very committed in the books world to publishing as much as we can. We recognise the advantages of it, and we're pleased that traditional model is accelerating. But we're also very conscious, as our journals colleagues are, of the financial barriers, and so we're experimenting with a lot of new ways of providing kind of funding to enable researchers who don't have access to the BPC to publish open access. And the initiative that we're most excited about at the moment, and there's a link to the fuller details on the slides to encourage you to go and take a look at it, is what we call our Flip It Open program. So this is a pilot that we're running at the moment with just a relatively small number of books, 28 books, where we publish them in the normal way, but we make a commitment that when our revenues hit a certain threshold, when they hit a certain level that we announce in advance, we will make those titles open access. And this is obviously dependent on collaboration and very sort of generous support from our library partners, who are happy to buy the titles to begin with, and do with a view to them becoming open access. And so we recognise part of this program, the Flip It Open program, is very much a collaboration with libraries, and we kind of recognise the contribution and support of libraries in that. So we're excited about that. We only just launched it last year, but the initial signs are encouraging, but it'll take a year or two before we can know whether this is a model that we can open out more widely and become sort of similar in a sense to the transitional agreements that Daniel was describing in journals. So I think my final set of slides, if I remember correctly, are just some examples of some books that we've published gold open access from authors based in the region. So they're a mixture of subjects, and they illustrate, I think, very clearly some of the advantages that we've been talking about with open access in terms of usage and impact. So here's an edited collection, again quite a specialist subject, but it's the altmetric attention score. That is a measure of how often the book is talked about in social media, people tweeting about it, talking about it on other social media platforms. And then we also have the data of the usage, the number of views and downloads from our Cambridge site. So this book here has had just under 11,000 usage downloads, which is much higher than we would expect to see typically for normally conventional books. So if we go through them quite rapidly, and we'll just see the range that we've got. So next slide, please. One published last year, already 6,000 downloads. So it's less than a year, already 6,000 downloads. So the next slide, please. And next slide, please. Again, and the next slide. So we'll go through these very quickly, please. Yeah, and yeah, so I think this is the last one on the slides here, but you see that's 80,000 downloads for really quite a technical book on aspects of international economic law. I think that's my final slide, is it? Oh no, one more. So yes, I'm happy to say also that we're the Elements program is also a lot of open access elements being published, and our first author based in East Asia is publishing their element later this summer. Okay, I think that's everything that we have. So some links to some more information there.